I'm talking about the society, impacts on society. I believe in numbers, and I believe in what you measure is what you get, so you get a lot of numbers. I think there are other people who are doing the social impact in terms of media and others, but of course this is an important part of everyone's life as well. So I'm talking about the disease trends and now and in the future. Asbestos-caused cancer is a long latency disease. It's already coming out from many sources here. And the measures to be taken, ban asbestos. And I think one of the key things what I'm going around in different organizations, starting from ILO, from the European Commission, the European Economic Social Committee, many other bodies, individual governments, to do something on this. It's a key point that if you don't convince the policymakers, nothing really will happen. And it's a long, long process. I recall that 1938, the ILO's encyclopedia annex or second supplement to the ILO's encyclopedia in 1938 first time recognized that not only asbestos is causing asbestosis, pneumoconiosis type caused by asbestos, and also saying first time that it may cause cancer, carefully worded, not saying that it is, but may cause cancer. From 38 until today, a lot of things have happened, but you can see that's a slow process to convince different governments, different regulators and policymakers not to talk about the employers and producers and users of asbestos. What we know today that in the European Union, 88,000 people die, and this is pretty convincing figure. I think almost everybody agrees because we have a lot of data from the European Union. We do not have the same amount of data from all over the world. We know the disease registers and mesothelioma registers and so on from European Union. Such kind of things don't exist in most parts of the world. So then we have to estimate and make sort of informed guesses what are the similar outcomes in other countries based on facts, based on, for example, what is exactly the number of asbestos used in different countries. And my friend, who has originally Finnish roots, Robert Virta in Finnish language, is originally coming from not far away where I'm living now. His family is coming from there. He's fully American, of course. He has done a lot of work in telling what kind of asbestos use where is being done all over the world continuously and systematically. So there are good data for that one as well. Also, the exposure limit, the exposures are varying, and also the exposure limits are varying. Some countries have absolutely no limit values whatsoever. And one part is that we often think about the number of fibers in terms of fibers per milliliter or cubic centimeter, or fibers per million. That means if you look at millimeter, that's a small part. If you look at cubic meter, that's quite a different thing. So if you have a limit value, for example, of 0.1 per milliliter, which is the common value for those who are, for example, today in most countries in Europe also working with asbestos, reducing the asbestos, taking it out from buildings and so on. 0.1 fiber per millimeter is equal to 100,000 fibers in a cubic meter. A cubic meter we are inhaling in half an hour, easily, in and out. We wondered also at the time when the European Commission building was renovated in the heart of Brussels, that is there any fibers in the building of ILO in Geneva, where I used to work at that time. And we found that there were 600 fibers inside my office, so inhaling all the time. So I wondered, where is that coming from? There were very small elements, some asbestos blankets for fires and so on in the building, all removed then. But then we identified that it comes from the outside air. Outside the building, ILO building, in the park area, called Via Appia between WHO and ILO, trees and grass and horses over there around. It was 900 fibers. So intake filtering took some fibers out, so it was still inside the building 600 fibers. So in Geneva, Park City, no heavy industries, 900 fibers per cubic meter, inhaling all the time. So that is the case definitely here in this particular place in the Netherlands, where asbestos has been heavily used in a city. I'm sure that it's about that level as well here. So inhale deeply those asbestos fibers today here in this particular room. So close to 1,000 fibers every half an hour. So of course this kind of impact, small impact for huge whole population will have also impact in the long run for the numbers. This is the figures for occupational cancers in particular. The orange figure shows that how many people are killed by occupational cancer only, and out of that I put here some of the numbers. For example, we expect 106,000 people dying from occupational cancer, and most of it in the European Union, 88,000 are caused by asbestos. There's similar numbers in proportion in other countries as well. And this is typical for developed countries. If you are in a poor area in the world, then comes more important. Then the other problems comes more important, such as accidents and the endemic diseases come more important as well. But I think in our places, this is one of the most important, in terms of death, asbestos, the most important thing or problem. See how this will work. These are the asbestos fibers over there. You can see the individual asbestos needle-like fibers, and the immune system of the human being, our cells are attacking the fibers desperately. Of course, can do nothing with the rock needle-like fibers, but trying. And that is creating a constant inflammation in those locations in our lungs. And this is, I talked to the Eurotox in a conference of toxicology in Brussels some time ago with a British expert in toxicology. Most cancers, or maybe all cancers, have some sort of inflammation behind. And this inflammation is exactly the one what is the one causing the problems in the long run, creating the cancer itself. So whether it's aromatic amines in your bowel, when you are eating red meat, or you are having needles in your lungs, these are the creators of the inflammation causing the cancer then in general. Okay, so one problem is that if we only trust on those factors what we know and are recognized, for example, one of the body recognizing carcinogenic impact is the IARC, International Agency for the Research of Cancer, WHO body in Lyon, France. Then we come to certain things, but we have to keep in mind that the official recognition takes time. For example, diesel exhaust has been causing problems for maybe 100 years already, but diesel exhaust was considered carcinogenic only a couple of years ago, once they finally had enough evidence on that. The same for asbestos as well, that it is gradually gaining the knowledge. But then second thing, that while we don't have all kind of reasons always listed, like here, like the Institute of Health Metrics, they don't cover all. So that means with different kind of outcomes of the studies. But the second thing is that what are the different parts of the body? How can we identify those impacts? And equally, we are only today, like the Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation recognizes lung cancer, mesothelioma, of course, and ovary and larynx. But at the same time, there are many other problems that I have linked to asbestos. For example, just this autumn from September to now November, I had been involved in 3 different doctoral theses in my own university in Tampere. And each of them found link to cancer, and particularly on asbestos. For example, bladder cancer has linked to asbestos, kidney cancer, renal pelvis has a link to cancer. So all of those, and they have not been classified anywhere so far, and never in any kind of statistics. So that is one of the factors that once we study more, we will get more and more numbers. The latest study, this also published in the journals, scientific journals, but we came to the 2 different numbers. The Institute of Health Metrics numbers are here on the left, and this is a study made by Ken Takahashi, Tim Driscoll from Australia, myself and others in Japan and Australia, came to higher number of mesothelioma. And mesothelioma is in a way an indicator also of the asbestos exposure. Because once you have mesothelioma, you can be sure that there's been asbestos exposure. So once you have that kind of mesothelioma cases, you can extrapolate also to the lung cancer, how much exposure you had based on that. And we came to the figure of 38,000. That one too might be an underestimate compared to 30,000 used by the Institute of Health Metrics. So if you use the bigger number, what we did with a careful study separately, then we come to the bigger numbers, which are 247,000. If you use the Institute of Health Metrics, we come to a lower number. So we are talking about 220 to 250,000 fatal cases rather than the officially announced WHO figure years ago, 107,000. So and I believe that these figures are going up still and continuously. Once we get more information, the numbers will continue to grow. Really? Yeah, okay. This is the figure, but I made 2015 estimate of 47,000 in Europe, and now the latest figure is 87,000, and not no more by myself, but pretty. I'm participating in the GBD study, but I'm one of hundreds and hundreds of other people who are contributing to that. So I think this is something what is continuously growing, and evidence increases the numbers. Also, when we made, when I had in my earlier study what was in the picture before, the numbers were here in the table, and I updated those for the conference in Vienna on occupational cancer, and they are the occupational cancer numbers. Latest what we know are in the yellow. Some comparison here, asbestos only, it's 87,000, and the latest 106,000 of cancer. So the similar kind of relationship you find here based on the ILO supported study made in 2017. And we are working on the new numbers again. We'll see what will come out of that. Then trends. This is, for example, total trend asbestos death in the UK. Fatal cases. I don't really know. Maybe this temporarily going down. I can't say whether this is really absolutely correct or not, but maybe because the heavy exposure from the 1960s, 70s went down, but then still the exposure has been high enough that the numbers, because of the most likely better information and the detection of the diseases, is going up in the UK from year to year. This is 2017 over here. If you look at the numbers in Sweden, slightly different because they banned asbestos 20 years before Britain, 1983. Iceland was number 1 in the world, and then followed by Sweden. Finland came only about 10 years later, 1991 or so. But in Sweden, you start seeing some slight going down in the area of, until 2017. If we go into the young population, young population means in this case 50 to 69 years old, that's a young cohort over there, then you see not so big increase anymore in the UK, but compare this figure, this part of the figure here to Sweden, much more radical figure already, that the young cohorts who have not been heavily exposed anymore come down. And this is the first indication, a solid indication, that stopping early asbestos, banning early asbestos, has a major impact. And that will continue to go down, of course, the longer we go in time schedule. So I think nice to see that there is an impact, and this is the first ever real solid experience that yes, the banning of asbestos has an impact, but the delay from 1983 to 2019 today is a long, long one. So what we have to do now is to stop ban asbestos in every country in the world. That's the idea of also the Vision Zero, what we were advocating earlier this week in another conference in Finland. Netherlands is not particularly good over here. So if you look at the number of cases, in this case, these are the per 100,000 workers. So this is comparable in different countries. So unfortunately, Netherlands is leading in this per capita numbers. But again, we have to know that in Britain, in Netherlands, well recognized already to compare to many other countries. So I'm afraid that not. These are reflecting the data what we get from different countries. So those countries that don't report anything, and even countries, for example, Bulgaria, they have some in the mesothelioma register, some 55 fatal cases per year, and only 5 of them, 5 reported to WHO. So this is the kind of thing what happens, garbage in, garbage out. So if you look at the GBD tables, you clearly see the magnitude of difference. The lung cancer is the biggest component over here. In the UK, 13,000 compared to mesothelioma, 2,770. But then we also have the ovary cancer and larynx cancer. And we don't have any information of those other cancers, colorectal cancer, bladder cancer, kidney cancer, and so on, where asbestos equally has a solid evidence creating problems. So these figures are likely to grow once we get that kind of information at one time. They are published now, but before they go to IARC processes and so on, that may take long time before they are really recognized. If you look at the Netherlands, similar things. The difference is that we haven't found so many asbestosis cases in the Netherlands, but the numbers are smaller because of the smaller population. This is the same figure what already was presented earlier by Professor Frank, Arthur Frank over here. So I think Selikov and others made this. But I wanted to show here that what is often forgotten by medical doctors, medical profession in the world, that once you have a victim having lung cancer, they don't ask the question proposed by Ramazzini hundreds of years ago in Italy, what is your occupation? They simply think, okay, lung cancer, smoking, finished, no discussion whatsoever of any asbestos link. Practically all asbestos, or most of the asbestos lung cancer victims are also smokers. But if you want to know what is the cause of asbestos, then you have to look at not only that there are links between 11 no asbestos non-smoking and 58 asbestos and non-smoking. It is about 5 times bigger. or smoking 1, 2, 3 to 600, 5 times bigger. Easily, companies said that if you only stop smoking, you come from 600 to 100. But equally, if you stop, if you are stopping smoking, you come to either 600 to 58 or 123 to 11. But equally, if you go from asbestos to no-asbestos, you save 500 fatal cases on that. And that's the way how we calculate the numbers, what are missing altogether from the medical profession. Practically none of those, if you die in a hospital for lung cancer caused by smoking or expected to be caused by smoking, no post-mortem, no looking at what was in the lungs and so on. So those 500s are still there, what are caused by that. Employers can have impact on smoking, yes, on the workplace, but they can have no impact on smoking at home. Employers have an impact on 100% whether there's asbestos or not in the workplace. So these are the cases what need to be taken into account. If you look at the attributable fraction with this kind of thing, if this is 5 times bigger, 5 minus 1 is 4, divided by 5 is 4, 4 out of 5 means 80%. Stopping asbestos eliminates 80% of those cases. If you don't have asbestos, 80% of those cases are disappearing. So that's the attributable fraction, this 80%. Smoking is strong as well, it's even 90%, but at the same time, we have to keep in mind that occupational disease comes from asbestos, smoking disease comes from other reasons. These are the numbers in the European Union for in the total cases, this 87,000, 88,000 practically. So from UK, Italy, Germany, France, Spain, and then comes Netherlands here, pretty high for a relatively small. But we don't have always that accurate figures for all the others, but this is the present knowledge what we have for those countries in the European Union. Some comparison still from the whole world. We have here number of China, for example, lung cancer 21,000 and 2,000 mesothelioma for China, which is 5 times bigger than European Union. Sounds like a small one. There's a certain fact because asbestos use has been coming much later in China in massive scale. They have used asbestos, but the industries has been not so high. Same in India and Indonesia and so on. But this is questioned whether it is 21,000 and 2,000 here or is it bigger. And we came a somewhat bigger number for mesothelioma, comes closer to 10,000 already in China. So that depends what you really count and how do you make the estimates. But interestingly, mesothelioma in this number, 10,367 is exactly what I made some 4 years ago, totally in a different method. So I think the systems and measuring systems are pretty good in this particular case, but good if you have good data from the source country. If you don't have, then it's come like in China, India, and Indonesia and other populated countries, it's a different case. Where are we with the history in the UK? They are hoping, at least, that it will start going down soon in the UK. There's been slight decline from 16 to 17 on the numbers, but I'm not sure it's still the final one, but hopefully it may start going down. But that is not really sure yet. But if you look at the numbers, what they estimated, for example, there's a bit busy graphics. They estimated 2005, that kind of thing, and they hope to have the peak already by 2015 here. Now it looks like the peak is going to 2020 and much, much higher. So these are the existing numbers now. Not to talk about, for example, Thailand, where the peak was fairly recently, and the peak will be sometimes in the year 2050. So these are the cases. I have Singapore and Finland here as a model. But the exposure is here, problem is here. Here Thailand, exposure is here, problem is here. Mesothelioma numbers are important also because of the lung cancer, but here as well we can see that I'm not really convinced of the numbers which are really low, like Singapore and Korea. I know for Singapore because I worked for 6 years over there. So mesothelioma register had something like 30 cases, but then the figures what they tell is again 1 or 2 cases per year, because the compensation system has a limit of 1 year. Victims of asbestos exposure have to report within 1 year of finishing their work in the company. Mesothelioma doesn't come in 1 year. So that is a ridiculous regulation over there. And they just don't want to change that. Well, I advocated to changing it, but they don't want, because it's going to be expensive for the industries. They have to pay more compensation. So these kind of things exist, that cancer is a disease. Occupational cancer is an administrative decision. And they have sometimes absolutely no link to each other. So they are just decisions, political decisions. But still, if you look at the numbers here, I found sort of 3 different groups with the UK, Australia, Netherlands are sort of a high group of mesothelioma cases, while then there are medium group of including, and Italy also quite high, Finland, France, Sweden, and so on. And then there are these low, and USA is here in the low level. I'm not sure if it is absolutely true either in the United States, but maybe. But that doesn't say the full truth. If you are having mesothelioma, that depends on what kind of asbestos exposure you had, whether you had atmosite or tremolite or crocidolite or chrysotile. Nowadays the exposure is mostly chrysotile, but you don't know what is the contents of a chrysotile bag, of course. But then the lung cancers are much, much, much higher over here. So this might compensate. You might not have that many mesothelioma cases, but then it means that the lung cancers may be compensating for that. You still have very high number of those, which are in a totally different magnitude already. But the problem is that those disappear because of the reasons behind. So then the question is that how can we identify the exposures? We have a really old CAREX cancer exposure register for European Union. At one point, 1990, it was 1.5 million exposed. Perhaps today it's between these numbers still those exposed workers, and problems continue. But we don't have proper data. Nobody updated the CAREX register for a long, long time. So hopefully that one day we know more about it. And the numbers here, cancer, asbestos cancer fatal cases are more or less depending on the size of the country. So Netherlands here in this particular case. Costs. I made a relatively simple, somebody said quick and dirty. Maybe yes, but I think by maybe not accident only, because the same facts are behind. By accident, the long-term study in the by the Health and Safety Executive in the UK came to practically exactly the same numbers for occupational cancer costs, and this is cancer partly caused by asbestos. We are talking about how many disability-adjusted life years are coming out of asbestos, and these are all from the GBD numbers what we can get. We made some adjustments because of the GBD doesn't take all them into account. And once you have the number of years lost, you know how many years have been lost from the production. And coming depending on you know how much is one worker producing, what is the GDP of one worker produced. So then we come to 108 billion, American billion here. Means billion in German is milliard in German or French or Spanish. So that is American billion, 10 power to 9 euros. So if you look at how much we complain about giving money to Greek government when they have been in trouble, we are talking about minor things compared to this already. And this is every year, continuously. So if you count again the Commission number, they counted one cancer, and the virtual statistical life cost is 4 million. One death by asbestos cancer or whatever cancer is 4 million. So if you take 88,000 times 4 million comes 3 times or 4 times higher number than that. So that virtual statistical life is to how much should be invested in order to prevent one. So that cost, what could have been done just for prevention, would be creating totally different. This is the sort of intangible outcome what needs to be taken into account. Once you only count the direct expenses and production losses, you come to low figure. If you take the intangible numbers, you come to 3 times higher figures than that over there. Okay, I already talked about the asbestos exposed, so I don't go further into that. Numbers are there. Some quickly elements of how to behave in eliminating and identifying where there is asbestos once you start the removal process. And this is the way of systematically looking at what to do in order to have finally licensed waste disposal to dispose asbestos waste at the end. So it's a process needs supervising, needs regulation and well-organized system in the whole society, how to treat with asbestos removal in any one country. Then, of course, we have continuously illegal removal of asbestos-containing materials. People themselves do it, or they just ask their friends and so on to do things. And a lot of things happen exactly in that way. So you need to have proper enforcement for that kind of thing in order to stop, but also media information, knowledge, so that people know themselves what are the problems caused if they do it in the wrong way. I myself, with my wife, we removed asbestos sheets from our house some time ago, done really nicely with the moonlight suits and so on. Not a single sheet was broken, not a single fiber hopefully coming out from there in the outside air, and everything was taken without breaking any kind of asbestos anywhere into the container took into the waste treatment, properly done in a big scale. So I think can be done safely and sound without anything. And finally, the roofing cost, we paid something about 25,000. So the asbestos removal itself made some 2,000 more over there to have particular licensed company, trained workers, well-equipped workers, done it in a proper way. It took a bit more time, yes, but that was done well. So you have these kind of things in many different, you have seen the examples already where you can find asbestos fibers. And the methods, if you are inside, you have to have the vacuum system that you are isolating the whole place from anything else, so that if there are fibers in that area, there's under pressure not anything going out of that area, making it in a correct way. Recommendations, we have to have a strict regulatory framework and no renovation, no demolition if asbestosis exposure is likely without any particular agreement and authorize people to do the thing further. New CAREX is certainly important, and similarly Canadians have a CAREX. Similar register need to be done in other parts of the world. Equally, the exposure limit values still from, even in Netherlands it's only 10,000, but there was a proposal by the expert committee in Netherlands to come down to 420 fibers for amphibole, 1,300 for mixed, and 2,000 fibers for chrysotile, so per cubic meter. So this is about 100 times smaller than what is today's 100,000 per 1 cubic meter. So my simplified proposal is to have 1,000 fibers per cubic meter, which is 1% of the present limit value, 0.1 per 1 cubic centimeter. So now I think this kind of recommendation need to be put into practice. It's possible, and you can do it in a proper way. You can reach that kind of limits. So asbestos is a real problem. Exposure, even low levels, can cause fatal disease, and current risks are mainly those in the maintenance, renovation, repair. Well, I think European Parliament is looking into that exactly now, and in those renovation and repair and so on. Hopefully they come into a better care of that thing also in the regulatory framework, and then minimize the exposures, and recommendations, they need to be implemented and put into practice. Thank you very much. This figure is to show that we need to work together. This is from the Southern European Observatory in desert of Chile, in the mountain high up, where we have several big observatory telescopes and number of small ones around what are mobile. So then you can combine the picture of one telescope, maybe 30-40 meters wide, to maybe 1 kilometer wide telescope because of the distance. And you can combine with the South African, Australian and so on telescope to make global telescopes much bigger accuracy once you have long distances. Similarly, in asbestos removal, our knowledge should be based on those individual units around the world to know better the picture. If one person, one unit, one institution makes one estimate and another one provides one solution here, these need to be done together so that we get a better global picture. Thank you.